Coming up on Bridge City News, our province's Chief Medical Officer of Health has a COVID-19 update for us, including 2 more deaths associated with the virus. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder says she's concerned that the federal Liberals may introduce legislation potentially taking away some of our freedoms. And a Lethbridge man had a close encounter with a coyote. We hear about the experience from Brian Parker.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The province came out with new COVID-19 numbers late today. The Alberta government says there are 162 new cases of the virus, along with 2 new deaths. One was a male in his 70s in the Calgary zone, the other a female in her 80s in the North zone. There are a total of 2,158 cases now across the province. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Deena Hinshaw, says to help protect yourself, you should do more than implement physical distancing and self-isolating, but you should also give up smoking and vaping since COVID-19 directly attacks the lungs.
Smoking and e-cigarettes can expose the lungs to toxic chemicals. It is not yet clear whether these exposures increase the risk of catching COVID-19. However, they do increase the risk of severe illness for those who get infected. There is growing evidence to suggest quitting smoking or vaping, even temporarily, can have positive outcomes in the prevention and treatment of COVID-19.
Dr. Hinshaw says workers at the Kearl Oil Sands camp north of Fort McMurray have tested positive for COVID-19. Others at the site are being tested for the virus as well.
Currently, 3 people connected with this work camp have tested positive for COVID-19. 6 more individuals connected with the work camp were tested yesterday and are currently isolating. Their results are expected shortly. Alberta Health Services continues to work closely with the company to implement outbreak procedures at the site and to minimize any risk of transmission. These procedures include appropriate cleaning and infection prevention, as well as continued emphasis on following my guidelines for managers and operators of industrial work camps.
The union representing workers at the Cargill meat processing plant in High River say about 1,000 employees have been laid off following an outbreak of COVID-19 related cases at the plant. In a statement, Cargill said it has not laid off any employees, but it's only temporarily cut shifts. Earlier this week, 38 employees tested positive for the virus. Union officials say 1 person has since been hospitalized. The union says it asked Cargill to close for a 2-week period, which it refused to do. The City of Brooks is dealing with an increase of COVID-19 cases. In a release earlier today, city officials said there have been multiple cases of the virus at JBS Food Canada, along with a staff member at Sunrise Gardens. Alberta Health Services says they are working diligently with both locations to track close contacts and put strict measures in place to control the spread of the virus. The province says all agricultural businesses are being considered essential services during the COVID-19 crisis. That includes greenhouses and farmers markets. Agriculture Minister Devin Dreeshen says the industry is important to maintain the supply chain. He says that includes non-horticulture products such as growing supplies, ornamental plants, and hardware. Dreeshen sent a letter to business owners with information from health officials on what rules those businesses need to follow to prevent the spread of the virus. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says he's upset that the federal government is considering putting forth legislation that would penalize groups they say offer misinformation in regards to COVID-19. Here is one of Scheer's tweets from earlier today. Reports that the government is considering restricting free speech is very disturbing. The government should not take advantage of a health crisis to infringe on our hard-fought freedoms. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder posted a video to Facebook earlier today saying the Liberals would want to control what information you have access to either online or through other sources of media. Harder says this sets a very dangerous precedent.
This is a direct imposition on our freedom, and it is wrong. Now, I find this incredibly unsettling that the Liberal government would want to put an internet czar in place, an individual or an entity that would monitor information that Canadians are accessing. I find this unsettling for a number of reasons. Of course, primarily because I believe in freedom. I believe that it is one of our basic liberties as Canadians and that the government has absolutely no business telling us what we can and cannot engage in terms of our sources of information. But I find this unsettling also because the government should actually be looking in the mirror first and foremost before anything else. And that is to say, the government is actually responsible for spreading some of the most dangerous misinformation with regards to COVID-19 that has come out yet. This is what I'm talking about. Trudeau and his health minister, Minister Patty Hajdu, they ignored local experts, local doctors, local researchers, local epidemiologists, and instead they went with some false information that was put out by the World Health Organization, namely that there would be absolutely no risk of human-to-human transmission with regards to COVID-19 originally.
A week after announcing it was recalling 6,400 workers, WestJet has sent layoff notices to 1,700 pilots. WestJet says the layoffs are a last resort as part of cost reduction measures imposed during the colossal impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on air travel. The Airline Pilots Union says 700 members are to be laid off May 1st, followed by another 1,000 on June 1st. WestJet recalled workers it earlier laid off using Ottawa's emergency wage subsidy and says the pilots will also be able to access the program. With COVID-19 shutting down businesses and limiting hours within the community, you would think that commercial crime may be on the increase considering business owners are not at their properties. But according to Staff Sergeant Glenn Henry with the Coaldale RCMP, commercial crime along with other crimes are actually on the decline.
The town of Coaldale, our calls for service are 429 in 2019. And they've dropped down to 231. Break and enters into both businesses and residential properties are down as well, with the exception for the town of Coaldale. We've seen a bit of a spike there in a few. And again, a lot of those type of statistics are related to individual criminal activities, individuals that are active, and then when we arrest them, then they become inactive and our stats drop.
When it comes to domestic disturbance follow-ups, Lethbridge Police Service say they're no longer doing them in person. Officers are calling people's homes and can arrange for an online video chat. Ainsley O'Reilly visited the LPS and has the details.
When I spoke with Officer SASKA VANHALA of the Domestic Crimes Unit, he said that when this COVID-19 crisis began, he expected to see a significant amount of domestic dispute calls. He says that looking at the numbers, he's only seen a slight increase over the last couple of weeks. Where they have seen a large amount of increase is with civil disputes involving children.
I don't see that going away anytime soon. In fact, I would assume it's just going to continue to get worse and worse the longer this goes. We're trying to respond to that as best as we can. A lot of it stems from civil disputes, but we want to prevent it from turning into a criminal matter.
If you or someone you know is at risk, you may also call the Alberta Family Violence Information Line at 403-234-SAFE. The provincial government is allocating $53 million towards mental health initiatives due to COVID-19. Here in Lethbridge, David Gabert of the Canadian Mental Health Association says that in light of the pandemic, they have introduced a new initiative called Wellness Check.
You can send an email to Helping Hands at Volunteer Lethbridge, just detailing the situation. We do have to have consent to reach out to anybody. So that first initial phone call would be explaining that they have been passed on as somebody who might be interested in a wellness check. And then they would be asked if it's something they're interested in. If they are, then we would proceed further with the wellness check. The other thing that we're doing is we're making the wellness check package available to different organizations. So be it a sports team, be it a faith community, be it a school group, any number of organizations that might have members already.
According to a survey conducted by the UCP government, 3/4 of Albertans feel that their mental health has been affected by the pandemic. Of those, a third say they're dealing with some form of depression. The catering industry has taken a big hit during the pandemic, but one local caterer has found a creative way to remain open during the crisis. The owner of Bavaru has started a campaign to encourage us to think about our neighbors who may be undergoing quarantine and might need a meal or two. Instead of doing events, he is now delivering to private homes and doing curbside pickup.
We decided to create family meal boxes. So we have different sizes, small, medium, and large. And yeah, at one point I thought, we have to find a way that we can help the community using what we know what to do, right? So, and I had a lot of customers wanting to buy meals for other families. So then I said, maybe what if I make it more affordable so they can support more people? And that's what I decided. When you buy a family meal box to someone else you know, you receive 50% off on your meal. And you know, being in quarantine is tough to be cooking every day. You feel like you're quarantining in your kitchen, right?
Bavaru is open 4 days a week, Wednesday through Saturday, and their international menu changes each and every day. A local Lethbridge woman has joined a new initiative called Headbands for Heroes. Their goal is to sew as many headbands as they can for frontline workers who have to wear face masks during the coronavirus pandemic. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains, the sewist is making the headbands for free and a way of giving back to her community.
Crystal Winter has been sewing headbands for frontline workers in an initiative called Headbands for Heroes.
I'm doing it for frontline workers, so anybody who's working in grocery stores or with the public or in group homes or with people with disabilities or that kind of thing. Anybody who needs to wear a face mask all the time, they're free to have. I'm not charging any money for these at all.
For Winter, the sewing of headbands started when she got in contact with two nurses.
I first started making them for two people that I know. They're both nurses. One works at the hospital and one works at the health unit. And I thought, you know, I don't know if they're wearing face masks all the time or anything like that, but I'll just make them a couple, drop them off at their houses and see what the response is.
She says that sewing helps her clear her head during this time of COVID-19.
I have 3 kids, so we're at home. I'm a college student, so all of my classes were moved online the same time my kids were. And so there's a lot of big feelings at my house at the moment. And so it's helping me process and also decompress because I use my sewing and my creating to be able to just clear my head so I can deal with my everyday life.
Winter says she hopes that if people receive a headband, that they'd pay the gesture forward.
Buying somebody behind you in the drive-throughs coffee or, you know, offering your neighbor to help get groceries or that kind of thing, you know, just a little bit of that extra kindness is going to help out and go a big way this time.
Crystal Winter received a request for 50 headbands and says that she'll be very busy this coming weekend preparing them. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
A Lethbridge couple is taking music to the streets to bring happiness during the COVID-19 pandemic. They are doing so through Jomani Duo sidewalk concerts. BCN's Loris Alexander explains what that is and how the couple is connecting with the community through music during this very difficult time.
Health is really crucial right now, really important, but we also want to remember that mental health is really, really important as well. And mental health is really hard for people when they're cooped up and isolated and, you know, can't have their regular connections with family and friends.
The once busy schedule of the talented Jomani duo now cleared and diverted to an alternate route.
As musicians, like pretty much everything we do has either been canceled or moved online over the last couple weeks. Any performances that we had scheduled were canceled. We both teach private lessons and that's become online lessons.
We had performances of all sorts that were canceled with the Jomani duo, with the Lethbridge Symphony, with Global Drums, different groups that we play in as well.
The GROENHEIDEs play an impressive collection of instruments from all around the world.
Primarily, we're bringing the steel pan, which is a Caribbean instrument from Trinidad and Tobago, and then an assortment of hand drums, such as the djembe, the cajon, and the pandero that we had with us today.
We've played a lot of birthdays, some anniversaries. A couple places that we've played for have invited their neighbors to come out on their porch, and we've had kind of people standing in front of a couple different houses all listening.
For more information on bringing a little happiness to someone's front lawn, please visit jomanimusic.com. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
What was meant to be a routine walk with his dog Peter and the Lethbridge Coolies on Wednesday morning quickly turned into a tense situation for local Ryan Parker. Parker was chased by a coyote that, according to him, was not afraid of getting too close.
This coyote comes right up to my right side and just kind of is like, whoa. And I was like, whoa, what's this all about? Because I'm used to coyotes kind of being a little skittish. You know, you see them in the distance and they're usually kind of running away from something. And then my dog saw it, and then I saw it, and I was like, okay, pulled out the camera, take a picture, okay, shoo. And it wouldn't go away. It just kept on coming around. And so I just thought, okay, I'll just try to scare it off like you do with a bear, like yell. I sounded a little goofy in the video, but my heart started beating because this coyote seemed very aggressive, like he wouldn't let us go by. And so when we went one direction on our normal route, he kind of cut us off, for lack of better. So we said, we'll go back the other way, and he kind of circled around us.
Alberta Fish and Wildlife offers online resources and tips on how to best deal with coyotes. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, says before life can return to normal, officials need to be able to detect and stamp out new outbreaks of COVID-19. Tam says we need to continue working on ways to increase capacity to do widespread tests for the virus.
When we get to epidemic control of the first wave, which is our collective objective and our goal, you have to have sensitive laboratory testing. You have to have good testing systems so that you can detect any reigniting, if you like, and the sparks and clusters reoccurring. So for sure, ramping up our capacity in anticipation of that period of time where we have to detect further chains of transmission is very critical.
Across Canada, there have been 1,191 COVID-related deaths. There are close to 30,000 confirmed cases in our country, but also close to 10,000 people have recovered from the virus. South of the border, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence says more than 3 million Americans have been tested for COVID-19. Sadly, Pence also said that more than 27,000 Americans have lost their lives to the virus.
Our hearts are with their families and with the families of all of those that continue to struggle with the serious consequences of this illness. But as Dr. Birx just reflected, despite the heartbreaking losses, we're getting there, America.
It seems that certain celebrities are lending their star power to help gather PPEs or personal protective equipment during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, says sometimes all it takes to get the ball rolling is a simple tweet.
Haley Wickenheiser had, put out a tweet saying, "Hey, look, I'm willing to go out and pick up PPE, personal protective equipment. If you've got it to donate, I'll drive to you and pick it up." Ryan Reynolds saw that and said, "If you donate to Haley, I'll give you bobbleheads or movie paraphernalia or autographs." Doug Ford, Ontario's premier, saw that, and they were having a bit of a collection drive this past Saturday. He showed up with 32,000 masks from Ontario's new car dealers. They donated them.
Mr. Lilly will also discuss how quickly Canada may reopen its economy following the COVID-19 pandemic. That is coming up after business news. Well, we had sun mixed with cloud and fairly mild today. The mercury should be climbing by quite a bit in the coming days. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. A nice spring-like day in the Windy City again today. The mercury will be going up quite a bit tomorrow and into next week. Jeanette Roche is here now with all of the weather details.
Yeah, so the good news is the mercury is definitely rising as we're starting to get into those average April temperatures finally. Tonight we're going to see clear skies and an overnight low of 1 degree. Into tomorrow it's going to climb up to 15 degrees. We are going to see some increasing clouds though in the morning and into late morning as well, with some wind gusts up to 50 km/h. Friday night, we could see a chance of rain with a low of 1 degree there. So let's look ahead now to the Saturday temperature as we head into the weekend after tomorrow. Finally, Saturday, we could see a possibility of some rain showers with a high of 4 degrees. Then lots of sunshine again for Sunday and Monday. Highs of 13 on Sunday and 17 degrees on Monday. We could climb all the way up to 18 degrees on Tuesday and see a high of 17 degrees on Wednesday with increasing clouds for both Tuesday and Wednesday. Not too bad. And like I said before, we're finally getting into those average April temperatures. This time of year, we should see an average of around 13 degrees, an average low of -1. The high temperature on this day was, look at that, 30 degrees. That was back in 1984. The low temperature was -11 in 1953. The sun rose at 6:36 a.m. and it set at 8:26 p.m. right on the nose. So there you go, as our days are getting longer, heading closer to summer. And let's take a look at our temperatures across the west tomorrow. Victoria and Vancouver are going to see some increasing cloud with highs of 13 in Victoria. Vancouver's high of 15. 7 degrees expected in Edmonton and 11 in Calgary. We should see some showers tomorrow across both central and southern Alberta. Over in Saskatoon, high of 13 degrees. Same for Regina as we see scattered clouds there across Saskatchewan. And into Manitoba, Winnipeg's high tomorrow will be 10 degrees with lots of sunshine. Over in Toronto, we're going to see still they're dealing with that precipitation over there. Mix of rain and snow in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. 6 degrees all across the board for that region. And then as we look further east into the Maritimes, we're going to see lots of clouds in Fredericton, highs of 7 degrees. Could see a chance of snow in Halifax, 5 degrees is their high. 5 also expected for Charlottetown with a mix of rain and snow. Same thing for St. John's tomorrow with a high of 5 degrees. There you go, Hal. That is your forecast.
Today's weather highlights are brought to you by Dan's LA Carpet Cleaning. Residential and commercial carpet and furniture cleaning since 1989.
The federal government's loan program for small businesses will now be open to businesses that had payrolls last year between $20,000 and $1.5 million. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Ottawa is working on a new support program for companies having trouble paying rent. It will help businesses cover rent for at least 3 months. Trudeau says details still need to be worked out with the provinces and territories. Stats Canada says February manufacturing sales were affected by both COVID-19 and rail blockades. The federal agency says sales only increased 0.5% over January to $56.2 billion, following 5 consecutive monthly decreases. But it says without rail and coronavirus disruptions, sales would have increased 1.3% or an extra $465 million. The growth was mainly due to higher sales in the transportation equipment industry. The head of the International Monetary Fund spoke with epidemiologists for answers on how to move forward after the agency is facing huge demand for support from its members during the global pandemic.
We actually are doubling emergency financing right now, going from $50 billion to $100 billion, and we aim to have this delivered within weeks, not within months. We have to be mindful of the difficulties that emerging markets, developing countries would be experiencing, and we have to do for them what advanced economies do for themselves. Very massive support, building this bridge between now and the period when the pandemic retreats.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 59 points on the day to 13,899. The Dow was up 33 points to 23,537. The S&P 500 was up 16 to 2799, and the Nasdaq was up 139 points to finish the day at 8532. Oil was down 21 cents to $19.66 a barrel. Natural gas was up 9 cents to $1.69. Gold was up $1.46 to $17.1848 an ounce, and silver was up 2 cents to $15.48 an ounce. Wheat is at $245 per metric ton. Barley's at $239, canola's at $4.57, and corn is at $243 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 78 cents to $97.68. Feeder cattle were up $2.45 to $120.30. Lean hogs were down $2.13 to $39.78. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 70.79 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a week after announcing it was recalling 6,400 workers, WestJet has sent layoff notices to 1,700 pilots. WestJet says the layoffs are a last resort as part of cost reduction measures imposed due to the colossal impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on air travel. The Airline Pilots Union says 700 members will be laid off May 1st, followed by another 1,000 on June the 1st. Millions of Canadians could be declaring bankruptcy because of COVID-19. Toronto Sun journalist Brian Lilly will have details on just how devastating this virus has been on our economy in just a moment. There are reports out saying that China knew about the coronavirus and waited for almost a week before declaring it a pandemic. Apparently, the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus, hosted a massive banquet for thousands of people, and millions of people began traveling through for Lunar New Year celebrations. To talk more about it is political journalist Brian Lilly. Now, Brian, Chinese President Xi Jinping warned people on the 7th day, but by then it was a little too late.
Yeah, you hear about the 7th day. Often that's a good thing, right? You think biblically, 7th day, that's a good thing. No, in this case, it was not. He warned people on January 20th that there was a pandemic, but 6 days before that, the Chinese government had been informed, looks like we're headed towards a pandemic. This is bad news. It was in the middle of Chinese Lunar New Year celebrations. And look, many of the first cases in Canada, be they in Ontario or in British Columbia or in Alberta, they were people who had gone home. They're Chinese Canadians. They'd gone home. It's Lunar New Year. They're going to see their family. They're going to see their friends. They don't even know what they're walking into, Hal, because there are all these things going on in the area in and around Wuhan, and the Chinese government has not told them. We had heard before, we had heard previously that the Chinese government had underplayed the issue of how many people had been infected, how many people were, had contracted the virus, how many people had died. We had heard all of that. What we had not heard until this story from the Associated Press, where they obtained internal Chinese government documents, they did not explain that, you know what? They knew about this 6 days before they told the public. There were banquets in Wuhan with literally tens of thousands of people. As many as 3,000 people were infected. That's the estimation during this time. And then many of those people turned around and said, all right, I'm going home. I came to see my family. They're going home to Toronto. They're going home to Vancouver. They're going home to Calgary. Guess what? They spread the disease worldwide because the Chinese government lied.
Brian, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the Chinese government simply can't be trusted when it comes to sharing information on COVID-19 or anything else such as building Canada's next generation wireless system.
Yeah, Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, holding a media teleconference, and one of my colleagues was on that conference call. I got to write up the story about it, but, questions about, okay, should China be held to account for what happened? And what do you say about countries like Canada that want to allow Huawei to be part of their 5G? And he just said, you know what? If you want to have Huawei as part of your 5G, you can do that. But American intelligence will not go over networks that are not secure. And networks that have Huawei as part of them are not secure. That was a very clear message. He wasn't being threatening. He wasn't being dictatorial. He was just saying, if that's what you want, you can have it, but you won't get American intelligence. Now, why is this important? Well, American intelligence actually gave us some of the first warnings about the coronavirus. American intelligence, through the military, informed our military, which informed our public health agency about some of the very first instances of the outbreak and the very first facts that this was not what the Chinese government was saying. So we want to be part of that, whether it's for pandemics or for military alliances. There are so many reasons that we want to be part of it. And allowing Huawei into our system is detrimental to our well-being. Now, TELUS, they are the first company in Canada to start rolling out their 5G network, and they say they want to make Huawei a major part of it. Why is that? Because Huawei is cheaper than everyone else. And Huawei is cheaper because Huawei is backed by the Chinese government. They are, hand in glove with the Communist Party of China. So, are they able to undercut any other competitor? Absolutely. But as we found out during this whole pandemic, in Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who keeps talking about saying he wants to make Ontario the manufacturing heartland again for everything that we need in an incidents like this, like personal protective equipment. He says, do we want to really say we're going to, go to China for masks because we'll save 5 or 15 cents a mask? Is that what we want to do? Well, that's what we're going to be doing with our 5G network. And the Trudeau government has been dragging its feet on this. They haven't said no to Huawei, but they haven't said yes. In the meantime, we've got the two Michaels being held over in Canada, Michael Kovrig, Michael Spavor, and nothing is being done about them, but they are inextricably intertwined with the Huawei story.
Brian, let's talk a bit about those masks. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced recently that Alberta was handing out millions of masks on Ontario to help you guys out, many in BC as well, and Quebec. Why is it that Alberta has such a surplus? And some Albertans I've talked to said, we're a little concerned if things run a little dry here, but you say there shouldn't be an issue.
Well, Alberta's doing what the federal government should have been doing. And you and I have talked about this before, the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. That should be there for the entire country to draw upon. And unfortunately, it's not, because the federal government kind of let it dry up under the Trudeau Liberals. They just said, we don't see the value in this. They brought in experts from places like Emory University and Johns Hopkins, and they just said, you don't need all this material. You don't need to have all this on hand in case something happens. Well, it turns out we did. The reason Alberta has so much is that Alberta, unlike most provinces, where there's the provincial government and then there are regional health authorities, and I couldn't even tell you how many we have in Ontario. It's such a big province geographically and population-wise, but I can tell you next door in Saskatchewan, I think they've got 3 or 4. In British Columbia, they've probably got about a dozen. And all of these regional health authorities do their own purchasing, or in some cases, depending on the province, the hospital does its own purchasing. In Alberta, they do the purchasing for the entire province. So that's why Alberta has more dedicated supply chains than other provinces. That's why they've got a month's supply when some of us have days or weeks. And that's why they're able to say, you know what, we're good. We've got a month's supply. We can give you a week or so. We can spread that out across the country and help you out when you're in a difficult situation. And we're confident that we are going to get what we've ordered. You know, as one Alberta official said to me, we've got supply chains that have been going on, you know, relationships with manufacturers, not distributors, but manufacturers that have been going on for more than a decade. And they know that at the end of this, Alberta will still be there to buy from those manufacturers. Do you want to anger that big of a customer and say, well, so-and-so's offering me a couple bucks more, we'll give it to them? Well, Alberta figures that no, they're in a good position. They'll be able to buy this. They'll still get the shipments that they're expecting. Other provinces, other parts of the country, they're not so sure.
Brian, a big story across many countries has been the death toll mounting at long-term care facilities, including here in Canada. You've had some Bob Cajun in Ontario. We've had him at Mackenzie Town in Calgary. Many seniors are dying in these long-term care facilities. And the feds say they're going to increase wages in many of those centers to help a lot of the staff.
Yeah, this is the latest announcement from the federal government. That, and if you make less than $1,000, I can't remember if it's $1,000, I believe it's $1,000 a month, and your income has been impacted by COVID-19, that they will step in. But if you work in one of these long-term care facilities and you're making $2,500 a month or less, they're going to be topping up your wages. Now, this is going to be difficult because these facilities, regardless of where you live, are provincially operated or provincially regulated. So in some cases, you know, the province actually runs them. In some cases, municipalities do. In some cases, they're for profit, but the majority of the funding comes from the provinces. So the feds are going to have to work with the provinces on this and try and boost the wages. The reason for that, Hal, is that whether we're talking about British Columbia, where, you know, our first major outbreak happened in a long-term care facility, or we're talking about the place in Lethbridge you just mentioned, or there's several in Ontario that we could talk about, all of them are places where you've got, you know, a certain amount of full-time staff that are there day in and day out, and then you've got people that, okay, they work Monday and Tuesday in this location, and then Thursday and Friday, they work in a different location. And the concern is that it's those workers that move between locations that help spread the virus. And to you and I, we may get a little bit of sniffles, we might get a cough, we might feel under the weather. You know, worst case scenario, we're going to get some chest pains, heavy breathing, all of those things. But to people in long-term care facilities, this can, and as the statistics show, it will be deadly. These are the most vulnerable people in our system. Now, I've got to say that Canada, on the whole, is doing better than many other countries, whether we're talking about long-term care facilities or elsewhere. But if you're one of the families that's lost someone in a long-term care facility, that's cold comfort to you. And you just want to know that we're going to do something different to try and stop this.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has talked about potentially opening up the American economy once again very soon. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that may not be happening here for quite some time.
Yeah, and the only comfort that those of us that want to get back to normal can take from us is that he said weeks instead of months. So is that 3 weeks? Is that 4 weeks? Is that 6 weeks? Now, British Columbia is ahead of the curve. Alberta and Ontario were a little bit behind the curve compared to British Columbia. So what does that mean for us? I can tell you that here in Ontario, the provincial government has extended their emergency declaration through to May 12th. And I've been speaking to some epidemiologists who say, you know what? By the middle of May, we're probably going to start to being in the okay region. I know in Saskatchewan, right next door to you, they've got far fewer people in hospital, far fewer people in the ICU than expected. I believe that's the case in Alberta as well. I can tell you that's the case in Ontario. We're hitting about 27% of what the models that were released just a couple of weeks ago claimed we would be at. So if we can keep it at that level, then at a certain point, what we'll be able to do is start releasing things on a case-by-case basis, industry by industry, region by region, because, as you know, living down in Lethbridge, it's going to be different than in Calgary or in Red Deer or in Edmonton. And in Toronto, well, that's kind of the epicenter for Ontario, but in Ottawa, there's, less than half a dozen people in the intensive care unit with COVID-19. So why shut down the entire economy in Ottawa because you've got less than half a dozen people? Things like that. So it will be on a region by region basis that things start to return to normal. And yet officials will still say that there are some things that won't go back fully to normal for quite some time, perhaps a year or more.
Brian, COVID-19 has hit Canadians very hard. My daughter lost her job in Hamilton, and now a new poll says millions of Canadians could soon be declaring bankruptcy.
Yeah, about 1.2, 1.3 million people are saying that if things don't improve in the next 3 months, they're on the verge of bankruptcy. And then when you add in the people that say they're close to it, it becomes, I believe the number is about 4.2 million, say, it could head in that direction. These are not good numbers. Unless you're in the bankruptcy business, these are actually horrible numbers because it means, it's everything from everyday workers to small business owners to the local hair salons just saying, you know what, I'm done, I'm out, I'm shutting down, I can't do it anymore. And we talk about the economy and people say, well, why do you care about the economy? Why do you care about the stock market? The economy is not the stock market, Hal. We talked about this last week. The economy is the ability of you and your family to pay your bills, me and my family to pay our bills. It's everyone's ability to look after themselves. And if we keep shutting things down beyond when we need to, we start seeing worse outcomes in terms of our economic situation. That's what all of the political leaders are looking at right now.
Last week, the Prime Minister wrote to the provinces to look into bringing in the Emergencies Act. Brian, the Premier said no thanks, but many argue it's not a bad idea. Explain what that would actually look like if it was implemented.
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion around this because we always hear in the United States there's a big flood, there's a tornado, there's a state of emergency declared. Well, and we say, well, there's something bad going on here. Why won't you declare a state of emergency? Well, in Canada, the Federal Emergencies Act doesn't do a whole lot except take provincial powers and give them to Ottawa. And the provinces, be it Premier Kenney in Alberta, Premier Horgan, I can tell you the language he used on a phone call with the other premiers, Premier Ford, Moe, Legault, they all said, we're handling this. We don't need you to take over our powers. Please don't do this at this point. So the Prime Minister heard the premiers. He backed off. He said, okay, if you've got this, I won't do this at this point. I really think that the push by a lot of Canadians to say we need to enact this is based on the fact that they don't understand what this means. This is simply taking provincial powers and giving them to the federal government, which is even further detached from the lives that you and I are living in our respective jurisdictions.
Brian, we only have about 30 seconds left here. Before I let you go, you were at a recent event featuring a lot of star power, including actor Ryan Reynolds, hockey legend Hayley Wickenheiser, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. What was that all about?
Well, Hayley Wickenheiser had, put out a tweet saying, "Hey, look, I'm willing to go out and pick up PPE, personal protective equipment. If you've got it to donate, I'll drive to you and pick it up." Ryan Reynolds saw that and said, "If you donate to Hayley, I'll give you bobbleheads or movie paraphernalia or autographs." Doug Ford, Ontario's premier, saw that, and they were having a bit of a collection drive this past Saturday. He showed up with 32,000 masks from Ontario's new car dealers. They donated them. He dropped them off. They FaceTimed in Ryan Reynolds. It was a bit of a love-in as they all talked about the great things they were all doing. But you know what? Each of them, people can dismiss this as photo ops, but each of them lending their name, Hal, has their respective audiences saying, oh, yeah, I can help. And maybe your company has 250 masks that you forgot about, that you bought for something, and you can donate it. It's that sort of thing. That's why this matters, and that's why it's good, and that's why I would applaud it no matter who was involved.
Yeah, joining forces for a great cause. Nice to see. Political journalist Brian Lilly joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
Teenagers are often frustrated with their parents for the rules they need to follow, and parents get frustrated sometimes with their kids not following the rules. Well, today's guest is 20 years of age, used to be a teenager not that long ago, and has some helpful advice on how to smooth out some of the wrinkles. Lissy Reno is the author of the book, The Heart of Your Teen, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Lissy, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Hal. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Now, I like that, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Lissy, explain what motivated you to write the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually come from a big family, so I'm one of 7 kids, and my parents lead a ministry called Visionary Family. And so after high school, I actually took a gap year, and I spent half the year at home working with my parents and working with their ministry. And it was really during that time that God really just put this passion on my heart for reaching out to teenagers and helping encourage teenagers in their family relationships, because no matter what kind of family you have, family relationships are hard for everyone, and no matter what kind of phase of life you're at, and especially during the teen years. And so I kind of began on this journey of helping teenagers kind of look into their family relationships and ask the question, so what does it mean to live for Christ first at home with our families and then everywhere else? And so I began speaking to some youth groups and some churches, and that's when I got connected with a publishing company here in Nashville called Randall House. And Randall House had published a couple of my parents' books, and they reached out to me and they said, hey, Lissy, we'd be really interested in you doing a book project with us, but we don't want you to write a book for teenagers. We want you to write a book for parents on how to have a better relationship with their middle school, high school age child. And at first, I was not excited about the idea at all. I was like, I'm not a parent. I'm not an expert on parenting. I was like, maybe I could write a page about this, but there's no way it could be a whole book. But my parents really encouraged me, and they were like, okay, Lissy, if God is opening up this door for you, then walk through it and see what happens.
So what are some of the biggest misunderstandings parents have about their teenagers besides defining what a clean bedroom should really look like?
Right. So the best part of this whole project actually was I got to interview teenagers from across the country and ask the question, so what did your parents do really well while you were in high school to help build a relationship with you? And what's one thing that you wish they had done differently? And some of the answers that I received absolutely blew me away. And that's what got me really excited about this book. And some of the things that teenagers said were like, I really wish that my parents would ask me more intentional questions about my life. I really wish they taught me more accountability with my technology and my social media. I really wish my parents would pray more with us as a family or read the Bible more with us as a family. And those answers were like across the board. And so as I started talking to more people and getting those responses, I was like, wow, this could be an incredible message for parents to hear from their teenagers about what they want in that relationship.
Now, you write that when parents give advice and instruction to their kids, sometimes it can maybe backfire a little bit unless it's done in a relational basis. Can you explain?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the whole premise of The Heart of Your Teen is that this idea that relationship has to come before discipleship. So before parents could try and have a discipleship relationship with their child, there has to be the foundation of a loving relationship first. And so the first chapter of the book talks all about how parents can build the foundation of that relationship. And what the book calls it, I talk about what having a heart-connected relationship looks like. So a heart connection relationship is one that's full of openness, honesty, trust, and love. So it talks a lot to parents about, okay, what's a great way that you can spend quality time with your teenager? Speak words of affirmation to your teenager. Have fun with them. Pursue their interests, engage in what they love to do and help build the foundation of that relationship.
So how can you create a relationship that is a safe place for your teenager to talk about some key or controversial issues?
Mm-hmm. So I talk about that a lot in a chapter that I write, and really it's kind of a two-part issue. In talking to teenagers, I found that a lot of parents tend to be kind of on the extremes of certain things. So you have parents that are filled with a lot of grace for their kids, to the point where maybe they're not pointing out certain issues that they might have. And then you have a lot of parents that maybe are full of a lot of truth, but don't have a lot of grace. And so what I've found and what's been really helpful in my personal relationship with my parents is that there has to be that combination of grace and truth that pair together. So parents that, some things that my parents would tell me that really helped me in high school were, Lissy, we're committed to you. We love you. No matter what mistakes you make, no matter what you do in your life, we are always going to be committed to you in love. But they would also tell me some things that were really hard to hear sometimes and speak truth into my life where I needed to hear truth. So I really think that one of the most important aspects of having those difficult conversations is to have both the grace and the truth present.
Now, when it comes to parenting, discipline is also a big part of the relationship as well. I remember when my son was really young, really little, he hated, being put into the corner, staring at the walls when he did something he shouldn't do. It's like, this is driving me crazy. Please stop. I'm not going to do that ever again, right? Can you talk a bit about discipline versus the need for affirmation and encouragement?
Absolutely. So one thing that I noticed in talking with teenagers is that a lot of them talked about how when they were little, their parents gave more direct consequences. So you do something wrong, you get a consequence. But as they kind of grow up and as we kind of become teenagers, the consequences decrease while the lectures increase. And oftentimes those lectures can be filled with a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, a lot of annoyance, sometimes on both sides for the parent and for the teenager. And so something that a lot of kids said that as I was talking to them, they're like, I think that if my parents gave me a direct consequence, that would actually preserve our relationship more. Because those lectures, all that it's doing is pulling the hearts of teenagers and parents away from each other. Because when that anger gets in, when that bitterness gets in, when that defiance enters in, I think that can be the real problem. And so for me and my parents, a lot of times if they gave me a direct consequence, it actually preserved our relationship better than them, acting out of anger or giving me this long conversation.
Like a reactive reaction, knee-jerk reaction. How can parents effectively get their teens to take their faith seriously and really make it their own?
Yeah, well, I think that I've seen, just as I've been growing up and kind of diving into this topic more, and like I said, how I am not an expert on parenting. I am not a parent myself, so all I can really give is sort of just my observations of what I've seen and what's been really helpful for me. But something that impacted me the most as a teenager and as I've been kind of becoming more independent and making my faith my own is just, first of all, my parents communicating their commitment to me. That was huge. The next would be seeing the faith of my parents active in their own lives. When I come down in the morning to see my dad at the breakfast table with his Bible open and doing his devotions, or my mom sharing with me about how her faith is impacting her personal life. And then also my parents just being willing to allow me to make some decisions about my faith, to press into the fact, it's okay to have doubts sometimes. It's okay to question what you believe. It's actually a good thing to be able to wrestle through those feelings and decide for yourself what you believe. But something that my parents did that was so helpful was just they always communicated that if I was having those feelings or if I was having doubts, they were the safest people in the world for me to talk to about those things. And I could come to them with anything that I was feeling, and they would listen and be able to help me sift through that.
It's not uncommon for a teenager today to say to their parents, I'm not going to church anymore. That's it. I'm done. I'm out. How should parents really handle a situation like that?
I think that's really tough. And I also think it depends on the age of your child. Now, if the child is in middle school, if I were a parent, I would say, okay, if we're paying for your life, if you're living under our roof, you're going to come to church with us because that's what our family does. Now, maybe your teenager is in college and independent and they're not wanting to go to church. Well, at that point, I don't know how much of the parents can force the child to do something, because at that point, you don't want to force your child to be a Christian or to actively live out their faith. It has to be a choice that they make for themselves. So I think a lot of it has to do with parents kind of offering that encouragement, again, offering that commitment, and going back to the base of that relationship. Because, if you have a healthy relational base with your teenager or with your child, no matter what age you are, it's going to be so much easier to have those types of conversations about faith and about church and all of that.
A lot of parents want respect from their teenagers, and I guess teens also want respect from mom and dad too. What needs to happen in order for mutual respect to be there?
During my senior year of high school, God really just convicted me on exactly that issue. And I think it really has to do with the fifth commandment, the call to honor your father and mother. Because for a long time, growing up in my house, and my dad's a pastor, and I was always the good kid on the outside, like, all my teachers and all my friends would always be like, oh, Lissy, you're so great, you're so mature, you're so wise. But at home, my parents would be like, okay, Lissy, you were rude to your sister yesterday. We see you being a little selfish in these areas. We think you need to work on this, this, and this. And really, I think where God really convicted me the most was that, yes, I was obedient to my parents. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't going out and doing all these things. But the attitude of my heart was one of defiance and bitterness and selfishness. And so it's that piece of what is obedience versus honor, because honor starts in the heart and obedience overflows from that. But if I was having just the actions on the outside that were making me a good kid, but my heart was full of dishonor towards my parents. And so I think that that's something for parents who, even if they have kids that are really young, to be able to start discipling that. Because, my parents could tell. If they told me to do something and I obeyed them but had a terrible attitude about it, they knew. And so I think parents can really start seeing that in their kids and start helping them disciple them in those areas.
Now let's talk a bit about social media and technology. What kinds of boundaries should parents be putting in place?
Well, how that is really a hard issue, because social media and technology it's everywhere for teenagers, and it's how we communicate, and it's just so ingrained in our lives. But what I talk about in the book, and there's a chapter on technology, is that really the key ingredient in our home was accountability. Because, as parents, you are never going to be able to keep absolutely all the junk outside of your child's life at all times. It's just impossible in the world that we live in. But in our house, we had to create this culture of accountability. And so when I got my phone, when I got my social media, my parents really communicated to me that, Lissy, your phone is not your private information. Like, we have the right to look at your phone at any time that we want. And even my dad, he would be like, look, Lissy, I don't even think that I'm above accountability. I need, I have accountability partners, and I have, these internet blocking services. And so we want to work together to create an accountability atmosphere in our home, because, that we have this saying that no one is holy enough for a secret online life, whether you're a middle schooler or an adult.
Now, we should also probably talk a bit about dating and the challenges of remaining pure in a sex-saturated world, Lissy. What advice do you have for parents and teenagers when it comes to sex?
I mean, that is a really tough question. And again, I think that it all goes back to that piece of the heart-connected relationship that you have with your child. And so I remember when I was in 8th grade, I think I had a crush on a boy at school, and I just really felt this like urge that I needed to be sharing those feelings that I was having with my dad, or just get some advice from him and talk to him. And I just remember having this like pit in the bottom of my stomach, like it was the last thing in the world that I wanted to do. It just absolutely made me sick. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I have a great relationship with my dad. I love my dad. I know my dad loves me. Why am I so afraid to talk to him about these things? And really, I have come to really believe that that was spiritual attack coming against the relationship that I had with my dad. And so I think so much of that dealing with relationships and sex and dating and all of that is, you know, if kids feel like their parents are safe people to talk to, then, you know, that's a win. That is a win for that relationship, because what the world is going to say is to teenagers is you should talk to everyone else. You should talk to your friends. You should talk to your mentors. You should talk to your youth group leaders. But the last person in the world to talk to is your parents, because there's that fear, that shame and embarrassment. And so I think if parents can really work through that and help build the relationship of trust and openness, that would be so helpful in navigating all of those relationships.
Lissy Reno is the author of Heart of Your Teen, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Thanks a lot for joining us today from Nashville, Tennessee.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.